LEIGHTDICKEY.com. Do you have an event or occasion coming up that could use a special touch? Perhaps a wedding, a production, a show? Good! Then you're in luck. Hayley Moores is who you're looking for. Hayley is a makeup artist in the Toronto, Ontario area, specializing in bridal, glam, natural, and special effects. She's incredibly talented, professional, easy to work with, and has a personality that is second to none. To book Hayley Moores today, follow her on Instagram at mad_milash, that's MAD_MILASH, or email her at madmilash, again, that's MADMILASH @gmail.com. Book Hayley Moores today, you'll be glad you did. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. Do you find yourself reminiscing on what life was like when you were younger? Do your favorite songs, movies, and TV shows instantly take you back to a simpler time? Great! Then you're in the right place. Join me, Leigh Dickey, on my new web series and podcast, Yo Nostalgia, where I cover everything you grew up with. From films and toys to fads and trends, Yo Nostalgia has it all. Subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever podcasts are available. Follow along on social media at Yo Nostalgia Show to keep up on this time-traveling trip. Yo Nostalgia, breathing new life into your memories, available everywhere now. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. Do you enjoy good conversation? Are you a person with many passions? Perfect. Then the Beats and Speaks podcast is for you. Join me, Leigh Dickey, every Friday for stories and interviews about everyday life with everyday people about everyday things. Everyone has a story, and I just want to help them tell it. The Beats and Speaks podcast, your everyday life, everyday stories, everyday people, comedy and entertainment audio joyride. Subscribe and download on LEIGHTDICKEY.com, Leigh Dickey TV on YouTube, and your favorite podcast app. The Beats and Speaks podcast, available everywhere now. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Leigh Dickey here. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Today, this week, I want to give you a sort of comparison and my thoughts on two industry standard and two widely used microphones within the broadcast and podcast industries. And those mics are the Shure SM7b and the Heil PR40. But before we get into the main event, before we get into this sort of microphone shootout comparison and my thoughts, I want to tell you where you can find the Beats and Speaks podcast. Of course, new episodes of the Beats and Speaks podcast are released every single Friday on my official website, LEIGHTDICKEY.com, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube, so please do go comment, like, share, and subscribe on Leigh Dickey TV as well. Of course, all those links will be in the description. If you would, please do rate us 5 stars and leave us reviews as well on your favorite podcast app and player of choice. If you have comments, questions, and guest requests, and if you want to be a guest on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, let's go back and forth and have a good old-fashioned conversation and a good time. Send your emails to leightdickey@gmail.com. Follow along on social media at LeightDickey. All right. Now that all that housekeeping is out of the way, let's get into the main event, my thoughts and a mic comparison between the Heil PR40 and the Shure SM7b right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. All right, so a mic comparison and my thoughts on both the Shure SM7b and the Heil PR40. Now, both of these microphones are widely used in professional broadcast and podcast applications. They're widely used in the podcast community and the industry as the 1-2, the standards, if you will, in terms of clarity and function. And that's exactly what you want. And then the they're both used in professional broadcast applications. I think Sirius XM uses more of the Heil PR40. I've seen them in several videos and interviews that they've done that they're using the Heil PR40, and several stations and companies, they use just a boatload of companies, they use the SM7b as their holy grail, as their main microphones, as their talking points. And to be honest, I should preface this, I don't actually have either mic with me, so this is just going to be based off what I've heard and how I think they sound. To be honest, after spending a considerable amount of my life in broadcasting, media, radio, television, entertainment, you get to hear how different mics sound through, different processors, preamps, how different cables sound and how they're used. And to be honest, for my ears and for my money, I'm not really a fan of either microphone, but if I had to pick, this all comes down to signal chain. This all comes down to the cables. This all comes down to, say, your compressors. This all comes down to your preamps and your preference in terms of what sound you want to hear. Now, to my ears, the Heil PR40 is a bit too bright. It's a bit bright for me, and I prefer something a little warmer, but not like too warm. And the Heil PR40 is just a bit too bright. And I've never been a guy that likes the popular thing, even though they're like the industry standards, a lot like the Electro Voice RE20 is in a lot of radio stations and a lot of companies. Same thing with the Neumann BCM 705 and the BCM 104. They're becoming the industry standard as well. But I've never been one to gravitate towards, oh, that's the popular thing. Oh, that's what everybody's using, so let's do that. To be fair, both the Heil PR40 and the Shure SM7b are they're on the expensive side. Now, granted, they're not as expensive as the Neumann BCM family of microphones, but they are pricey. They're both in the $400 to $500 range. So if that's your budget and that's what you want to do, and you may go right ahead and purchase whatever equipment and whatever mics you like. But in my opinion, and to my ears, the SM7B is a bit too warm and the Heil PR40 is a bit too bright, in my opinion. If I had to choose one or the other, this all comes down to signal chain and what I would like. I would pick the Shure SM7B, and I'll tell you why. The 7B is a notoriously quiet microphone. It has a ridiculously low noise floor. Now, I know that if you put, say, a cloud lifter or a FET head in between the 7B and your interface or preamp, then that'll give you, I think it's 20 decibels of clean gain with the FET head and 25 decibels of clean gain with the cloud lifter. I could be wrong. Somebody that does know, please let me know. Post a comment and just in the description and let me know if I'm right or wrong. So, it's the noise floor on the 7B is ridiculously low, and it's a ridiculously quiet microphone, right? I mean, I've heard Bandrew of Podcastage say that he's got I think it was a Scarlett that he had on at the time with his Shure SM7B, that he had it cranked at like 90% when it came to the 7B. Now, if you put like a cloud lifter in there or a FET head, you could lower your gain from 90% to say about 30 or 40, right? Now with the Heil PR40, it's a bit bright in my opinion, and I don't like anything too bright. Preferably, I'd like something warm, not like too Barry White-ish, right? I don't want to sound like Barry White coming through the radio. I'd like to sound like I have that booming radio voice, but I don't want to sound like I'm trying to make love to you through a microphone, right? I don't want to have that Barry White drawl. Don't get me wrong, he was one of a kind. Barry White had a bassy voice like no other. But for me, I don't want to sound like that. And, if I were to pick a mic between the Heil PR40 and the 7B, I would go with the 7B, but that would all come down to signal chain. I know that Joe Rogan uses the 7B, and his podcast sounds fantastic. Another one of my favorite podcasts, the Heine House podcast, or Heine House Live with Jason Heine of Heine House Entertainment, formerly of the All Gen Gamers podcast, and it was formerly known as the EMU Review. He uses it, and it sounds amazing. I don't know what processors or what his signal chain is, but he makes it sound fantastic. Of course, he's got a background in music and audio, as do I, but he probably knows more about it than I do. To my ears, even though I'm not a big fan of either microphone, I'd go with the 7B. Now, preferably, like, my favorite microphone of all time is what I think is either the big brother of the 7B or the older cousin, say. It's the Shure SM7b, which was used from, I want to say, the 70s or the 80s, right up until I saw it in stations as early as, or as late, as the mid 2000s. I'm not even sure if they're still around anymore or if any stations still have them, because I'm pretty sure they're not being used for on-air presentations anymore. But if I were to ever work with a microphone permanently, I'd want my microphone of choice would be the Shure SM7b, because that is a tank of a microphone. It's huge. The capsule itself is ginormous. It is gigantic. It is colossal, right? Now, I'm not saying in any form that either mic, the Heil PR40 or the Shure SM7b, is bad. I'm just not a particular fan of either mic. Heil because it's the PR40 because it just sounds too bright no matter what you put it through, or the 7B just because it's notoriously quiet and it's gain hungry, so you have to crank the gain ridiculously high unless you've got like a FET head or a cloud lifter in there to give you 20 to 25 decibels of clean gain. That way you don't have to drive your preamps as hard. So, I mean, that's just from my vantage point and from what my ears like and from hearing the sound of my own voice through podcasts, radio, television, and various forms of media. For me, I would prefer the 7B over the Heil PR40. Now, granted, they're both great mics. A lot of podcasters use either or the other, okay? But for myself, like, I have used Shure mics. My daily driver in my home studio is a Shure PGA48. It's nowhere near as expensive as the 7B or the Heil PR40. It was about $48. And of course, I have a windsock on it, and I've got a pop filter in front of the windsock, or a windscreen, or whatever you want to call it. I've got a pop filter on my boom arm, and then I've got a windsock or a mic cover on the PGA 48 itself. That's my sort of daily driver. If I'm in my home studio, that's what I use. And the interface that I use is the Art Research and Technologies. I forget what I think it's the Mini Mix. That's the one I use. And it is a $70 single mic interface. It's got 2 channels, and it's a very simple, very straightforward, very minimal setup. It's nothing too crazy. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to upgrade to, say, like the Scarlett Solo or just the Scarlett set of preamps. The Scarlett interface would be nice. Maybe the 2i2, just because I know those preamps are amazing. But, that's what I use. The ART Mini Mix, which is like a $70 interface, or it was when I bought it about 8 years ago, and it still does amazing work for me. And then I've got the Shure PGA 48, which is a dynamic vocal microphone, which does an amazing job. Like, I don't have to, I've got my gain sitting at about 70% normally. I don't know whether or not, putting a cloud lifter in my own signal chain is a good idea, because it's a fairly inexpensive setup that I have anyhow. It's like a $50 microphone, and it's $120. Okay, and this is Canadian dollars, by the way. So, a $70 interface, a $50 microphone, a $3 mic sock. I'm not sure whether or not, putting a cloud lifter in my own setup would be a good idea. But again, it all comes down to preference and it all comes down to signal chain. Cables that you use, preamps, the interfaces, just signal chain, preamps, interfaces, cables, etc., compressors, etc., etc. Depending on what you want to do and depending on your setup and your signal chain, that the final decision really comes down to you. Yes, the SM7B is widely used in radio stations, vocal booths. I think famously, I know that Luke Bryan is recorded with the 7B. Michael Jackson recorded Thriller with the 7B. The Heil PR40 is used by companies like Sirius XM, but so are the 7B and, of course, what is still the industry standard, or at least what many think is still the industry standard, the Electro Voice RE20, and then you throw in the Neumann BCM 705 or BCM 104. It's becoming a bit crowded at the top when it comes to like broadcast standard mics. Personally, I would prefer the 7B just for the sound of my own voice, just on the sound of my own voice, if I had to pick one or the other. But I'm not really a big fan of either mic. Granted, give me the Shure SM5b and I am a happy man, even though it's not manufactured anymore and it's not widely used and not widely available, because I'm pretty sure you cannot find those. And if somebody has a 5B, they're probably going to hang on to it because it's just an amazing mic. But then again, sound always comes from what the signal chain looks like, whether it's preamps, compressors, cables, and just everything that makes the mic sound the way it does. Whether the room is treated or not, with the foam and what have you, with the studio foam, whether it's up on the walls in the right places. And it also depends on, say, the monitors that you're using to hear back what sound you're actually getting. But for my money, for my own voice, now, of course, like I said, the final decision on which is the better microphone, whether it's the Heil PR40, which in my opinion and to my ears sounds a bit too bright, and then you have the 7B, the Shure SM7B, that's a really, really gain hungry. It's notoriously quiet and it's got a really low noise floor, but it is a gain hungry microphone, so you're going to be driving your preamps. So it's probably a good idea to invest in, say, a FET or a cloud lifter. But that all comes down to signal chain and personal preference. Tell me, what do you use? Do you use the Heil PR40? Do you use the Shure SM7B? Or do you have something like my own setup, which is a Shure PGA48 and an ART mini mix USB interface? What is your setup? Let me know. What do you use? Heil PR40, Shure SM7B. Which do you prefer? Let me know. But thank you all again for listening to another episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Of course, I have been your host, Leigh Dickey. Please do comment, like, share, and subscribe. Find us on YouTube under Leigh Dickey TV, your favorite podcast app and player of choice. Please do leave reviews. Rate us 5 stars as well if you would. Please follow along on social media. Send your emails, comments, questions, guest requests, and everything else to LEIGHTDICKEY@gmail.com to keep up with me on this podcasting journey. Thank you all once again. I've been Leigh Dickey. This has been the Beats and Speaks podcast, and we will see you all and talk to you all next Friday for a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. I've been Leigh Dickey, and I'm signing off. We'll talk to you all again very, very soon. Peace. LEIGHTDICKEY.com